Crow, for me, I have the I don't know if you heard coming in, but I have the heavens on my mind, the celestial bodies. So I'd like to focus the conversation there. And then, of course, if we wander off, down some other tributary of thought, we can certainly go there. But my mind's on the celestial bodies, the stars, the sun, the moon, the so-called planets. I call it the heavens, Crow. What do you refer to the sky? Is it space for you? How do you label the sky?
I call it sky clock because that's what I can see. Pretty much everything else that I guess I would think about has been infringed by what Hollywood and authors have wanted me to think about space, wanted me to think, what's it look like when a spaceship orbits a planet? So I've kind of discarded all that, and I'm going with what I can see for now. And, there's actually a little more than that. If I could read very old accounts, then I tend to take those to heart more than I would anything from our era.
So when you say old accounts, what are we talking about? I mean, you can go as far back as Bible. You can go to Sumerian cuneiform writings that are apparently supposed to be some of the earliest writings that we have in terms of civilization. Whether, we're going to take any common conception of history, that could be debated. But, you can look at the 1666, the Royal Society. What is old to you when you talk about, writings concerning the sky?
The 1800s are near and dear to my heart. There was high education in certain places, and the Rockefellerization, the modern edit, as I called it, had not occurred. And that came for us where we are here into force around the 20s or the 30s. It's how we lost our medicine. It's how we lost our education. We lost everything. The problem with going back too far is then you have authentication problems. And the truth is that the Vatican spent a lot of time with its scribes scrubbing through things that didn't jive with their messaging and changing it or deleting it. Even the maps. All these maps that are 100, 200 years old that are still showing the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, that's got to be an edit. There's no way on God's green earth people didn't recognize what the proper constellation behind the sun was at the solstices. And yet we are told that 100 years ago, all the maps had the wrong constellation. To me, that's an edit from somewhere. So to answer you a little more succinctly, if I can get into the 1800s, maybe even the 1700s, that's really the sweet spot. And then as you go back further, it's more work to try to authenticate things.
You just said something that intrigued me. So regarding the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, so my understanding is they're defined as the location of the sun during the solstices, right? So we would consider the summer solstice here in the so-called northern hemisphere. You would see the sun in Cancer, and the opposite would be the summer in the southern hemisphere, which would be in December. The solstice there, it would be the Tropic of Capricorn. Are you stating that that's in some way in error and not correct?
This is a dicey game because the sky clock, the constellations, they're no different than anything else. They got messed with. They got shuffled. They've introduced all these things to try to ensure that nobody can tune in down to the second with what we currently call astrology. But yeah, it's 2,000 years wrong as far as I can tell. The high point of the sun in June should probably be Gemini, and the low point should probably be Sagittarius. But again, there's so many problems. When you look at the constellations, they're different sizes. When we get into the boundaries in the modern era, and we've done shows on how everything got its name and what they did, basically some guys voted. They're 30 degrees each one. And that's not the be all and end all, but what I'm pointing out is all these arbitrary things have been assigned. And, in the era we are now, we know there's malicious people. They're trying to take over the world right now. And the power of recognizing what the sky clock can offer is astronomical, to make a pun. Who is it? The J.P. Morgan, I think, is quoted as saying that millionaires don't need astrology, but billionaires do, or something to that effect. The power of being tuned in at that level and comprehending the energies that run this place down to the second is almost magical from our point of view currently. And people have taken steps to ensure that it's not easy for the average man or woman to get anywhere near that now. That's my point of view. You have a constellation that is represented by a bull, and to have that name and to have it cross over into all the so-called classical myth, we don't think about what that means. Well, there's an energy there, and it's being defined and symbolized through a bull. Well, why is it? Well, because the bull was the energy that fit the bill, and that is where that came from. It's almost an alchemical saying, I think. What came first, bullishness or bulls? And that's what we don't think about. So if there is, in fact, a bullish energy that appropriately, at the time it was assigned, somehow conveyed the energy at that time, that tells you something about our world. Everything is connected. And we've kind of gotten away from that. And we're kind of lost in hyper-materialism. And let's face it, our education system has been in the toilet for longer than I've been alive.
So I wanted to jump on this. You mentioned the example of like the bull and how the constellations may have some type of energetic effect on Earth. Interestingly enough, there's a concept called the precession of the equinox. Now, some people will argue whether or not that's a real thing. Okay, some people say it's completely made up and the sky, stays static within its, cycles, and that it's always been Polaris as the North Star. But this idea of the precession of the equinox, to me, I don't know. I could totally see that happening if it's in my paradigm, but I'm not sure. Do you have any thoughts on this precession, Crow? Because it would make sense if you said the bull and then into the ram, which would be the time of like the Israelites and Moses and the ram's horn. And then you have into Pisces, which would be, the Christian time representing Christ. And now we're supposedly moving into this age of Aquarius. Do you have any thoughts on this precession of the equinox?
Yeah, the only reason any of us have heard of it is because it's been used to further their everything spins model, and the Earth is spinning like a wobbly top. The precession is misdescribed, and it's nonsensical, but it exists. That's kind of how we slip backwards through the ages. If we didn't have something akin to that, then it would just stay static. There would be no backward slip to call something an age. The precession, in my view, is just built into the sky clock. It's just part of how it functions. But that's not what you're going to hear when it's described. And the problem is literally the only reason we know the word is because it was taught to us to accept the kind of modern NASA model, which is nonsense. Everything from them is nonsense. And so we have these problems of words that are being appropriated by these modern places to kind of psychologically engineer the world. And we don't have other words to replace them with. So this causes all the arguments and confusion. But to cut to the chase here, the precession, in my view, is what allows us to slip backwards a sign through the zodiac to leave the so-called age of the ram and go into the so-called age of the fishes or Aquarius or any of them. But that's another thing. If you try to look up when the age changes, you're going to get a million different points of view. I have closely looked at what people in India have done and read their very ancient ideas about it. But isn't it strange that we're reasonably sure there's an age change and it isn't common knowledge? That kind of tells you that it's been, messed with, probably. Opposing ideas introduced and things like this. To this day, I don't find 2 or 3 people who agree on when even the change is. I mean, technically, we should be able to say on this year, here's the new age, but we can't really do that, or I can't really do that.
And you made an interesting comment that it's been arbitrarily sectioned off into 12 zodiacs of 30 degrees. But it seemed as though you were alluding to this idea that why should it be so static and regimented, and maybe some constellations are more or less than 30 degrees? Is that what you were alluding to?
I think back in the day, it wasn't rigidly bounded in the way they've done it in the modern times with 30 degrees. And it's like when we were talking, you said, so there's energies coming from these constellations. To me, that's a product of how we've been taught to think about it. I think maybe a better way to think about it is when this particular set of stars is up, these particular energies are being indicated, as opposed to saying, I see these stars, there is this energy, so it must be those stars, if you see where I'm going with it. You got to realize that the southern hemisphere had next to no constellation. They're all made up. There is no rhyme or reason. And in the northern part where we are, there's added in constellations, and we did a whole show on it. Some were thrown out and changed. And so what we have now is not very akin, from my point of view, to what was back in the day. So if you take something like Virgo, look how big it is, and then right next to it is Libra, and it's tiny. And this is another case in point. I happen to be within driving distance to one of the oldest libraries in the country, and I went and got some star charts from, I don't know, Rose, do you remember what century those were? Was it 1500s?
Yeah, it was something like that. It was like 500, 600 years old.
Yeah, something like that. And I was trying to prove that that Libra was added in. And the reason I was trying to prove that is because the two dominant stars in Libra are Zubin el-Shanubi and Zubin el-Shamali. And the direct translation means the northern and southern claws of the scorpion. So it was pretty clear that the claws of the scorpion got clipped to put Libra in at some point. So I went and I got the star chart and I filmed them. I think they're probably available somewhere. Rose probably knows where they are. But what I noticed was Libra was drawn differently on that old. It was like not the same bolded in line, as if for some reason it had been added in recently, or there was something different about it. And so this poses an issue. I know damn well that the constellations have changed over time. There's arguments that once upon a time there was 4, or once upon a time there were 8. There's arguments that say the oldest ones are the lion and the bull. Not hard to say I don't believe in that. I mean, look at words that we know are ancient, like bullion, right? Or Wall Street has the bull icon, but bullion is simply the word bull and lion put together. There's a direct reference to the sky clock there. But to come back around to the change in Libra, a lot of people might say, well, there it is. Someone messed with it. It's worthless to us. And I don't take that point of view. I think what's happened is it was changed to fit our time. But at the same time, it's entirely possible that people with power did things to, like I said, ensure that we can't use the sky clock down to the second. It's akin to falling into a river with rapids. A person who doesn't know anything about the energies of the sky clock, and you've fallen into the rapids. You have no idea what's coming. You have no idea where it's safe to get out, or where it might be safe to cross, or if there's a waterfall. You're literally at the mercy of the current, the energy in the river. Now, a person who's tuned in down to the second knows all about these things. I probably shouldn't be near the river today. I know there's a waterfall up there. These types of analogies have been used to describe it. The problem with talking about this in our era is it's been made a comic, right? We can get the Sunday paper, and next to the funny papers is the little horoscope, go find love this week, and other silly things that they've done to defame it. But the energies of the sky clock are as real can be. And in my view, they've been messed with just like everything else in our world, from our number system to our language.
Wow. And just for the listening audience, the age, I believe, is defined by the sun's location at the vernal equinox.
There's another argument. That's what a lot of people say, and other people don't say that. Some people say it's an hour or two before sunrise. Dylan Sicoscio has a well thought out view and a well researched view, and it's not behind at the spring equinox. Matter of fact, I suspect that the sign behind the spring equinox was introduced to confuse people. I really do. How does it, how do you do it? I'm not sure. If I had to pick a side just randomly, I'll go with what some of the Indians have put forward. They have an ancient astrology. The Vedic stuff is so brilliant. They know the truth, or knew the truth about the nodes and eclipses way back. We're still trying to convince people that the moon is causing a solar eclipse. The Vedics had it right back in the day. And that's, from what we've been told about it, that's an imaginary point in space. That's where one imaginary, equator crosses another imaginary line in space. That's what we've been told it is, but there's clearly something there. This is what I'm talking about. So what side do we choose? Well, it's not really important. How do we prove it is important. I set out with my telescope to do what I could do, but there are limits to what you can do visually, at least for me. Maybe someone 30 times smarter than I'll ever be would be able to take it further visually, but we've got a lot to learn because a lot has been denied us. The Saros cycle is 200. It's 223. Hint, hint, hint. 223 synodic months. SAROS, the synodic cycle. With the way we learn about things, we're never told about the cycles. You want to know why? Because if we were aware of the cycles, we would start to become aware of the energies. Because you could go back in history and say, well, we were 5 cycles in and this was going on in the world, this kind of thing. Also, we would start to be saying, well, wait a minute, when is the age change? I think what's going on around us, very few people doubt that the era is in fact changing, but the same problem remains. If it's going to change, there's going to be a day when we can say we're not in that cycle anymore, we're in this one. Well, what day is that? And there's not a common agreement.
Let's similar topic, but let's go to the moon, because as you were alluding to, Crow, this idea that it seems as though there's been some type of purposeful engineered attempt to take us away from the heavens and how they function as a very fine timepiece. And we find this also with the months and the cycles of the moon. Let's go into that a little bit. What is your knowledge and your concept regarding the moon cycles? They say there's roughly 29.5 days in a moon cycle, and there's other numbers associated with that. We're given now months that last 30 days or 31, so they vary. And, they tell us there's things like blue moons where we can have 2 full moons in the same month. But how could that be? Because a month is really a moon cycle. So
right.
Do you see this as another
of course,
maybe nefarious attempt to maybe take us off our natural biorhythm?
I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. How can you possibly have 2 full moons in 1 month when the word month comes from the word moonth, when it was 1 cycle of the moon? It is not sane to live in a society that has just a solar calendar. Minimally, you should have a lunar and a solar calendar. And there should be many more. Look what the Mayans did and other people. To this day, the Vatican wanted to set their most important day, which is Easter, or maybe they're among their most important days. But they couldn't do it because you can't do it with a solar calendar. So they maintain, I think it's a lunisolar. I think it's lunisolar calendar, which is also some of the Jewish people still, I believe, have a calendar similar to that. But their problem was what they wanted to do is force Easter to the same day everywhere in the world. Well, this is the kind of engineering I'm talking about. I got news for you, Vatican. A man in California does not experience sunrise at the same time a man in New York does, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to force everyone to say at the same time in the world, this day is Easter. So what they do is they say it will be The first full moon, I hope I get this right, I'll be in the ballpark. The first full moon after the spring equinox pulled to the nearest day of the sun, or Sunday. So they have to have, they're admitting in public that the solar calendar isn't good enough and that it's problematic. So they have to introduce a lunar calendar to set their most important day. But I spent a lot of time observing the moon, probably a lot more than most people that you'll ever meet. And what I can tell you is it is a mystery wrapped in an enigma. It is the most confusing thing you will ever try to apply logic to. Even the way it looks. My wife and I would set up on days and we'd look at each other because it would have this three-dimensional look, when just the day before it had this very flat look. Other days we'd be looking and it looks like the craters bow in. Then other days it would really look like they were bubbles bowing out. Just even the look of it is mysterious when you go time after time after time. But the thing about the moon is it's almost certainly involved in our death. And if there is such a thing as reincarnation, or people don't accept that when we die it's lights out and everything's gone, it's almost certainly involved some way in this. But what we've been told about it is that our astronauts went and landed on it, which I call poppycock. From my point of view, you couldn't put a boot on it if you wanted to. It's not dirt and rock in my point of view. I refer to it as a luminary. If pressed, I might put forward that maybe it's plasma or something like that. But now I'm just kind of guessing based on intelligent people's research. The problem with the moon, oh, here's one for you. A man, I forget his name, wanted to prove that the moon had to do with the tides. And that's where we get the statement, this is where reason goes to die. Because he couldn't do it. And yet to this day, we're told that the moon is absolutely causing the tides. And it's just not true. Things are more complicated than we've been led to believe. There's a book out there called The Worship of Augustus Caesar. And it is the best book because there's information in it I don't think you'd find anywhere else. And it points out how critically important eclipses are. They tracked them. And the reason they tracked them, lunar and solar, was because it was like watching the minute hand in an age. You knew where you were. You knew how many cycles had passed based on the eclipses and how many there were to go, or where you were in the midst of it all.
Oh, Crow, it's totally wild. When we had this last eclipse here on April 8th of this year, previous to that, I found a book from the 1800s that predicted the precise path of totality right across North America. I mean, it was exactly, and this book was published well over 100 years ago, almost 200 years ago at this point. And it had the perfect path marked out. And not only that, it had the previous solar eclipse that we had some years ago here across the United States, the one that went more west to easterly. Again, the path of totality was perfectly plotted out. The point of intersection was exactly where they said it was. Again, almost 200 years ago. And they had each solar eclipse illustrated for hundreds of years in the past and hundreds of years in the future. They have these things mapped out. And again, modern science is going to try to have us believe that it's because of their modern technology or their supposed understanding of the cosmos regarding, their exactitude in these things. But in reality, these things were known, like you said, in the writings from the 1800s before they seem to have been obscured in the early 20th century. There's so many places we can go with this moon conversation.
Since we're talking about eclipses, I haven't done this in a while, but I would urge people to go online and see if they can look up what kind of light source the sun is. And I'll tell you what it is. It's an infinite light source. But when I first started studying the sun with the cheap solar scope I got like more than 10 years or about 10 years ago, that you could look that up if you worked at it. Well, here's why that matters. And I'm assuming it's still difficult to find that. I may be wrong. I haven't looked, but here's why that matters. You mentioned the path of the sun. Now, they told us that not this one, but the one before, I think they said the shadow, the shadow from what they're saying is the moon was 70 or 72 miles wide, right?
Correct. And the last one was about 100, I think.
So here's the problem. The sun is an infinite light source. Now, I was a roadie for a while when I got out of the Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, most of the 90s, I was a roadie. And I learned a lot about stage lighting. If you take a spotlight and put someone in between the spotlight and a wall, it'll cast a shadow. Now, if you move the person, the shadow size will change. If you move the light, the shadow size will change. If you take an infinite light source, the shadow will remain the same size regardless of where the person or the light moves. And you can get ridiculous and say, well, what if he's 2 inches away? I'm not talking about that. But the example I will use, have you ever noticed when a plane flies over, the shadow that you see is the same size as the plane? That's because the sun is an infinite light source. Do you know what that means? That means that whatever cast the shadow on the solar eclipse was 72, or recently they said 100 and something miles wide. That's what it factually means. It's not arguable. It's what it means. And so our ability to look up what type of light it is and ideas like this undermine what they want us to accept is true. And when you begin to think about, is it possible that what just eclipsed the moon was only 72 or 100 and something miles wide? Well, the sun just told you that it was. And the sun lives in truth. The sun does not lie. And so these are the types of things that are being obscured and changed. And I'd be very interested to know right now if anyone can easily look up that the sun is an infinite light source.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, according to science, it's 93 million miles away, and et cetera, et cetera. And
let's talk about that for a second. This is the crux of the Rockefellerization, is to take an intelligent species and condition them and psychologically engineer them until they accept things that are so ridiculous a child would not accept them. As an example, there's a crater on the moon called Aristarchus. It's white, and if you've got decent vision, you can see it with your naked eyes on the moon. We're told that the moon is 340,000 miles, I think, on average, something over 250,000 miles. We're told that Aristarchus is 40 miles across. So you're telling me that with my naked eyes, I can see a 40-mile wide crater over 250,000 miles away. And by the way, while you've got me moved into fantasy land where common sense that an adult human being should have has fled the scene, why don't you go ahead and tell me that it takes 8 minutes for the light that is lighting my world to get here? Because now you're messing with the basic perception of everything. You've got my mind time traveling, for crying out loud. And these are the little things that have been inserted to literally take an intelligent species and train them to believe in things that are beyond ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah, and great point regarding the distances. We see things in particular ways, and there's a concept called the inverse square law, and that's works with all kinds of energy dissipation, whether it's light energy or sound energy. And the idea is that light dissipates at the inverse of the square, which means at each doubling of the distance, you have a quartering of the light intensity. Well, it doesn't take a math whiz to understand that you really couldn't see anything 93 million miles away. Or just like a star, they say is the closest one would be 25 trillion miles away. Based on the purported sizes and intensity of these stars, they really wouldn't be visible. And like you said, Crow, how could a crater be visible at 240,000 miles to the naked eye, given the size that they tell us it is? And it strains credibility. And this also goes for things like the ISS. Crow, we can see what is called the ISS as it transverses the moon. When I see the size of that ISS, it seems to be comparable to a jet airliner at a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. How is this possible? How does the ISS look the same size as a jet airliner, given the relative distances and sizes? So again, something's not adding up here. We're being presented with an idea of space, celestial bodies, satellites, whether natural or artificial, that don't match up to the physical world that we know. But again, we have a society that's been consistently presented with this story. Typically, it's been through emotional appeal, whether through movies or early childhood education or stories and fairy tales, even even in our academia. So this is not adding up. Regardless of what we want to conjecture the heavens to be, I guess maybe the fundamental concept here is it really could be almost anything except what they're telling us, because it doesn't add up to reality, and space seems to be debunked for me. It seems like it's been debunked for you, Crow. Now, there was a comment made on this channel the other day. You'll understand the more you explore the heavenly bodies in the sun, the more you'll realize that the globe is a reality. But I take umbrage with that comment because for me, Crow, I've had a completely opposite journey. The more I've actually studied the stories associated with the planets and juxtapose that with what I can observe and what is basically visible to me, the narrative has unraveled to the point now where it's completely fallen apart. And I find the space narrative completely impossible. Crow, you're obviously studying the sun very closely with high-tech equipment. What has your experience been? Are you, based off what you're telling us and what you consistently talk about on your channel, it seems as though your journey has been similar, where the narrative seems to be unraveling before all of us. What are your thoughts on that?
I had to forget. I have purposely forgot. I don't even know the correct scientific names for some of the things I'm looking at because I don't want to know. But the guy who said that to you is a perfect example of what I was talking about. The social engineering works. It will get adult human beings to believe in things that are ridiculous. I forget exactly what the escape speed is that they want to tell us, the speed you have to go on a rocket to escape this spinning ball. But it's something like 17,000 miles an hour. I don't know the number, but it's really, really fast. The problem is it's faster than a 30-06 round, or it's like a 30-06 round. Does anyone sitting here think they could sit on the nose of a rifle bullet? But that's not even where it ends. They're going to tell you that we're spinning faster than the speed of sound. Then that whole conglomeration is spinning around the sun at some ungodly, and on it goes. It is utterly ridiculous. Now, can I tell you where we are? No, I cannot. Unfortunately, I've been lied to my whole life. Even the maps I have been shown are provably wrong. The problem here is, how do we get back to something that we can accept? And the only way I know how to do it is firsthand observation. And it gets much worse, because think of the law. You said a brilliant thing using a law. A law matters. Why does a law matter? Because it's a freaking law. Because anytime anyone applies those things, the outcome is already known, because it is a law. Now, if you take the law of thermodynamics, I think it's the third one. I don't remember, but I think it's the third one, proves that the Big Bang is nonsense. Now, I have literally seen very smart people with high educations saying this very thing in a chat room where other people tried to weasel their way around to protect their belief in the Big Bang. But the Big Bang is not possible, and the law of thermodynamics proves it. And yet, one of the most popular TV shows in the world for about a decade, what was it called? The Big Bang. This is how it's done. And it's, that's just one small example. But how is it that we can have laws, that educated people are taught, and we still have these other ideas like the Big Bang that are put in books and taught and accepted, when the very laws that have been adopted over time and proved out to be laws prove that it's not possible. And this is the state we're currently in, where those two things can happen at once.
Yeah, it's completely wild. It's basically entropy, all right? And energy will seek an equilibrium, meaning to say that things don't by nature form into greater complexity. It's not demonstrated. And that's what it really is. It's that we're being presented with a what they call science, but merely seems to be pseudoscience, because the presentation is not able to be demonstrated practically. And we're now engaging in theory and postulation, presupposition. These are just basically constructs of the mind. They're not rooted, they're not substantiated, so therefore they can't be proven. And this seems to be the way we're going. I want to go back to what you said about the 1800s and the early 1900s. There seemed to have been a different line of thought in those times. If you look at the schools in Austria, if you look in Vienna, and you see the minds and you see the concepts that were being discussed and the technology that was being utilized in that time, there seems to have been a marked change somewhere around World War I and somewhere around the introduction into this, let's say, the bankster system, this sort of, federal bank takeover. What are your thoughts there, Crow? Because there seemed to have been a certain science that now has been occulted, right, in lieu of this new age pseudoscience.
There was honor, there was integrity, there was dignity, and there were men and women who truly were seeking to know more, to be able to do more, and to get that out in the world. World War I is so far in the rear view, most of us don't have a good view of it. But when I talk to people like Fortune, he'll tell you that it was the biggest deal that you will never be able to imagine, because everything changes starting then, because it was made up, like World War II, like Vietnam, to do a thing. You can go hear from the generals. I was in the Marine Corps and we were taught, to worship Smedley Butler. Well, there's a movie about Smedley Butler where they tried to take over the United States and get him involved in it. And I think it was him who made the quote, I was working for the wrong side. The corporations were in charge, this kind of thing. What World War, another person, Steiner, in some of the books that were published later, people write what they think Steiner's impression of World War I was. And Steiner kept saying, well, my masters have told me I can release all this secret information that we haven't been allowed to talk about because something really bad might be coming. Look where we are. Well, Steiner, you were right. Something really bad was coming. And I got more news for you and your masters. Who in the hell were you to hold back that information and all of a sudden recognize that you'd better release it because something bad might be coming? You see, this is the problem. And if we want to track it back, you'll probably be told the tale, well, we had to go underground or the church was going to stomp us out. Probably true. But up until World War I, really one of the only bodies that could, hold sway and stomp things out was the church, right? If they didn't like something. But it could only get away with so much because even back then, there was starting to be kind of a separation between what the scientists were doing and what the religious folk were doing. But after World War I, the die was cast. Then we had World War II. And if anyone wants to read Dogmas and whatever the hell it is by the top Freemason Pike, we're about to have World War III. He accurately predicted the first two in the 1800s and the outcomes, and he predicted a World War III as well.
So when you say World War III, I always had this idea that we were moving into basically a time of cataclysm where we would see the power grids go down. where we would see the loss of the monetary system and basically be, I don't know, thrusted back into some kind of pre-technological age. I'm not so sure that's what it's going to look like now. I think the technology is too integral. It's too tied in to their control matrix. I do think a lot of it's spiritual, but I think the mechanism by which they implement this spiritual control is through the technology. So I see this cataclysm more in terms of a transition into some type of maybe tyranny, where it's almost like a technocracy or some type of technocratic takeover. That's my view on it. But again, that's just how I have it organized in my mind. What do you see, Crow? I mean, you mentioned World War III. You seem to think that we may be on the precipice of something big. What is that in your mind? What do you envision?
20 years ago, I started talking about the things I talk about now. Very few people would listen, and most people accused me of being conspiratorial. About the time YouTube came online, information started to flow. And sometime after that, I became a person in the public eye, and I began talking about this, and it was still divided. Very few people were accepting much of what I had to offer. But I'll say now what I said then. There's something going on. You know it's going on. And why would this happen unless something is coming? When 9/11 happened, the die was cast. 19 years later, hint, 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 we get 2020, and the world economy and the American economy are broke. Lord knows how many people have passed away. This will not stop until it is stopped. What is going on, maybe it goes on every time there's an age shift. I mean, think about this. Enough time has not gone by for us to be where we are. Have you ever considered, how could we be where we are now with the timeline we've been handed? It seems to me that the Dark Ages are a cover-up, and I have it on pretty good authority, and it was backed up by people who are far more advanced than I am, that human beings lost their spiritual vision around the 1500s. We used to have spiritual vision, apparently. But maybe this happens with every age shift, or maybe we're zeroed out regularly, because it seems like things must have been zeroed out in some way, not too long ago, for us to be where we are now. There are all kinds of structures and buildings no one can explain. Even if you go to South America, we're told the Incas said, we didn't build any of this. It was here when we got here. We just took it over. But my point here is they're not going to stop until they are stopped. They make all these runs at things. They make the most dangerous bets you could ever imagine, and they are very good at winning those bets, like 9/11. But when they fail, I've noticed that they just regroup and they come at it in a slightly different way. They never stop. It's like a woodpecker banging on an oak tree. And this is going to continue to come until it is prevented. And the only way that I think that will ever happen is when en masse the world consciousness says we've had enough.
Well, that's such an interesting point. I mean, we were given the promise of the technological age, the marketing campaigns of the early era of TV. There was this idea that the technological revolution would be a benefit to humanity overall.
Let me interject here. Did you know that
Yeah.
the first drama ever broadcast in Britain on TV was from a lord's manor? You know what the date was? 9/11. They knew what it was. In the same way, kings and queens knew the power of theater. When radio came online, they knew they had a nuclear device in their hands, a real one. When TV came along, they knew they had that nuclear device times 100. They knew. And the computers, they knew. Computers are the strangest thing, because in a normal world, when new inventions come online, they succeed because they're useful. When computers first came online, they made everything harder. We even tried to jam video down phone lines, and we destroyed video in the era of HD down to 3 frames a second. I actually did that for a living for a while. Made 3 frames a second video to jam it down a phone line. We were told we'd save all this paper. We used 10 times the paper. Everything we did was harder. We lost data because backups weren't around yet. Everything about the onset of computers, with very few exceptions, was harder. You could make spreadsheets easier than with a typewriter, guaranteed. You could make pretty pictures and print them, guaranteed. But all the rest of it was a lot of hard work. So it's an invention where everyone was forced to work it into the system. Whereas normally, this guy comes along and says, hey man, I got this stick with a flat thing on the end. I call it a shovel, and it's really good at moving dirt. And everyone says, he's right. Give me a shovel. Well, the computer was the other way around. They knew. And I'll give you another hint. The Marvel movies that just came by, they dropped so many nuggets. They tell you there was a German dude who wrote the algorithm, I think they said in the 30s, to read the world, the open book that is the world. They told you that the 21st century was an open book. They told you everything. They knew that if they could get the data back in the 30s, they would have one hell of a tool to control and to predict. Problem is they didn't have it yet. But we also know by the time we see things like the B-1 bomber or the stealth bomber, what is it, 20 years old? You see where I'm getting at here? So by the time any consumer grade PC made it into our hands, how many years had it been perfected in some military lab somewhere? How long has AI actually been around? Would it surprise you if I said 75 years? I wonder.
Wow, it's completely wild. You know, we were told about the book burnings that were happening apparently with the National Socialist Party in Germany in the 30s. Well, that seems to be nothing, Crow, compared to the digital book burning that we're seeing now. I mean, we're at a point now where all knowledge is now becoming digital, and the idea of the ink and paper book is becoming a thing of the past. Well,
by design. Yep.
I guess that's my point, Crow. What do you think about it? Because it's almost as if now they have all the information in this digital form that with the introduction of the AI, it could be changed, it could be censored, shadow banned. I mean, we're getting to the point now where I remember the search engines in the early age of the internet. You'd be able to find information more or less if you were looking for something. This is completely not the case now. The information seems to be completely controlled, almost through some centralized, Ministry of Information. Is this digital book burning? Do you see this as one of the goals and the reason that they instituted this as our means of information?
It's a takeover of everything. Money, how we move, how we eat, how we breathe, how we get our information. It's a takeover of everything. And you can't edit a book easily. The books will go away at some point. Go read Fahrenheit 451. What's that tell you? The fire department shows up to start the fire, not to put it out in that book. But 1984, why is it that all the books that we had to read in the Western world when we were in junior high and high were predicting what we're doing? Animal Farm, 1984, Lord of the Flies, Fahrenheit 451. Everyone listening here that went through school in this country has read minimally one of them, Brave New World. Every one of those is predictive of what we are now facing. And the digital era that we have entered, let me tell you a little story. Jason and I were coming in on episode 77 with the podcast, and I had quit covering false flags because I had pointed out endlessly why people should quit accepting and being fearful of this nonsense. Then Mandalay Bay came along. So many people were fooled all over again. It was like everything that had not happened. So I made a minor mention in the intro for that episode. And in it, we showed that it was a play from Macbeth. Now, if you read James Shelby Downard, King Kill 33, you'll get why Macbeth is such a big deal. But Macbeth has a scene in it where witches are casting spells. Well, that's what they did. Opening, scene 1, 3 witches in a desert. Where did Mandalay happen? And there's a demon familiar that the witch conjures. What's the demon familiar's name? Paddock. Paddock was the shooter. So anyhow, to cut to the chase, I went through this to show everyone the game that was afoot again. And what did they do? They deleted my YouTube channel. No warning, no nothing. This was October of 2017 when censorship, which had already been going on, came full force into the light of day. Like, we're going to do this and there's nothing you can do about it. It was even on the cover. The censorship even made the cover of Wired magazine. Now, here's the rub. Everyone calling me, Crow, you've got to put up a new channel. Crow, you got it. And you're crazy. So someone kicks me in the balls, and what you want me to do is spread my legs again in front of a steel-toed boot. Ain't going to happen. I said, I'll never open another channel ever. So all of a sudden, one day I'm sitting around and an email comes in. And I'm all, that's weird. My channel's down. So I go look and my channel's back, but it's not my channel. Something wrong. Well, over the next couple of days, it kind of sort of becomes and then is my channel again with more than, I think, 20 or 30,000 people removed. But here's the rub. On the day before they did that, if you search Crrow777 in a search engine, you got 16 to 20 some million returns, unique pages. If you searched Lunar Wave, you got so many. On the day they put my channel back, if you search Crrow777, you got less than 2,000. But here's the ugly side of it. After you went through the first page, it was all duplicate returns. If you put Lunar Wave, that had gone down to a minuscule return. If you put Crrow777 with Lunar Wave, you got almost no returns. And then we figured out, because a friend of mine is a world-class hacker, that it was geographical. Some places wouldn't get any return on Crrow777, apparently, if they'd never searched for me before or heard of me. That was 2017. As it stands now, recent information that I've received says that if you are talking with someone, even if you think you know them on social media, there's better than a 60% chance you're interacting with a bot.
You know, that statistic doesn't surprise me. I've actually had similar experiences here online where I've watched in real time the introduction of these bots, and they're basically becoming more and more advanced to the point where they're almost indistinguishable from
They
conversing with a
trouble.
person.
Yeah, they start arguments a lot. Wherever you see an argument start, you can probably find a bot. Okay, we good? I'm going to take a quick break here. Okay, I'll be right back. Yep.
Perfect. Because I really wanted him to talk about his telescope. And he's also just told us today that he's going to upgrade it with new equipment. So that is really exciting because I'm just obsessed with zooming in on these sunspots. I know I put it up earlier while you guys were in the middle of talking, but I couldn't help it. I'm going to do it again right now. Look, this isn't crows, but this is from another amateur astronomy group. And it just blows my mind. And it really does look like the sunspot as a whole.
Oh, it's completely wild. It looks like something out of Star Trek, like the Borg, you know, like it's gonna engulf you into some other like dimension. It's crazy.
Look in the upper left-hand corner. Don't those look like cells? I don't know if they look like, you know, animal biology or plant biology, or it almost looks like some kind of melting, bubbling up. I mean, and these look like
wild.
I know you can't see my mouse because I'm on the StreamYard tab, but it looks like the edges of the sunspot where it becomes black. Doesn't it look like they're layers like epidermis?
Oh, yeah. The wonders and the mystery of the heavens. To me, I'll never get tired of it. Rose, I go outside, so I'll just stare at the moon. I'm that guy. And it's just, I'm still in awe. And here's the thing. The more I learn about it, the more in awe I am of these things because they become more and more inscrutable as I dive into these topics. And that's the thing. It's like the answers that we've been giving given regarding these things, they start to dissolve away. And then once you can break through the indoctrination, the programming, and the propaganda, and look at this world through fresh eyes, through the eyes that we have through our own discernment, our natural, let's say, God-given ability to think and reason, the heavens become something so incredible, spiritual, conscious, and it's almost like what has been presented to us is such a crime. It could be considered a crime against humanity, a crime against the Creator, to rob us from the natural glory of the heavens. What greater crime could there be? And that's why I think these topics are so important, because we're reminding people and reminding ourselves consistently that this is a wonderful place, a place that appears to have been created with intent and purpose. And this place is integral with our beings. And we are actually part of this greater consciousness. And this distinction and this idea of this materialistic world, this reductionist model that's been given to us of, through science, really has robbed us of that. So I don't know, the more we investigate these topics, the more wonderful they become. It's like Crow said earlier, the moon is such an enigmatic presence in the sky because it defies any known concept that we can have. It appears to be solid, yet it acts as though it's not. It appears as though it's reflecting the sun, but at the same time, it doesn't. So it also appears to have its own light source. And the way we visualize the moon seems to be individualized, and there seems to be a localized perspective regarding how we view the moon. It almost seems to follow you as you travel. So the heavens have been stolen from this generation. And I like what Crow said, this is the part where we have to make a concerted effort to take these things back. And it doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to have this mass awakening, but it just means that if one person and then two people and then 100 and then 10,000 people and on start to discover the world again, and they do research like Crow's doing. Like Crow said, he's not listening to NASA. That's the last thing he's doing. He actually purchased I believe it's a hydrogen alpha telescope, and said, I'm going to observe this thing for myself, use my God-given ability to think as a sovereign-minded man, and I'm going to make decisions about the sun myself based on my observations. So I think this is a perfect foray to get into this. What are you showing us here, Rose?
This is just someone else's work, and it's not as detailed as what Crow is doing in Hydrogen Alpha, where it's zoomed in and you can see the little surface detail. But I like how it shows the progress that the sunspots are going through, and I just get a vibe of electromagnetism from it. But I also feel like it's really silly how they have a little Earth to scale there, because when I look up at these sunspots, like here again, it blows my mind, and I just don't think that there would be like an Earth that fits in that sunspot. But what do I know? Oh, Crow's back. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so let's talk about your telescope and what you've been capturing and everything that members can get when they sign up.
Yeah, well, on the 21st, I had a big day. 10 years ago, and I included the footage. It's at the end of the movie Shoot the Moon, which all members get free access to, along with lunar waves. I filmed the second sun, or what we're calling the second sun, whatever it turns out to be. Clearly, whatever it is, it's related to the sun, but the SLU Observatory flat out called it the second sun and flat out told us NASA knows about it and they don't want you to know about it. I believe I located it on the 21st. Back on 6/6, which is actually ironically D-Day, my buddy managed to get a single shot off a monitor in white light, which is what you were just seeing. When you see the sun in only spots, that's white light viewing. He was viewing in white light and the clouds were rolling in. We couldn't get his camera set in time before we were blocked. So he ended up taking his phone and shooting one image of the second sun next to our sun. The focus wasn't that great. So here I am furiously trying to look at it again because the equipment now that I've got, I have completely geared up for this eventuality. I've got all these things, which I'm not going to talk about, that I plan to try to demonstrate some things. Anyhow, I set up on August 21. And as I'm shooting, I noticed this little thing above the spicules on the left limb of the moon. It's like a line all the way around above where the surface of the sun should be. And it's not easy to see. I shoot in black and white, and you do this to get the most data you can. The only thing fake about any of the images I make is the color. I choose what color it be. I could make the sun pink or green or blue. I make it orange because I think it helps our minds think about it. But anyhow, I'm looking at it. My buddy's with me, and he's skeptical. He shot the second sun, and he knows what I've done, and he's still not ready to jump wholly on board. That's how this topic is in the world mind right now. So anyhow, I take all these images and I do it over 3 days because I theorize that it's got to move. Well, it does. And so I made a video with my discovery. Right now, I suspect that the second sun spends a lot of time immediately behind our sun. Now, people have seen it. Well, I'm shooting in hydrogen alpha. That's actually in the visual spectrum, just so you know. It's way out to the right at the end of red, right before you leave the visual spectrum. But what my scope does is it cuts out all the other bands except hydrogen alpha, removing all the glow, the brightness, the energy, all of it. And that's why I can get the views I get. Now, back to the point. People have seen with their naked eyes the second sun at sunrise and sunset, and occasionally when there's weird mist or smoke from a fire in the air, they've seen it. I think what's going on is when you see it at rise or set, you're looking through the maximum amount of pollution and atmosphere, and I think it filters it and the brightness of the sun in such a way that we can see it occasionally. When the smoke from the Canadian fires happened, I got pictures of the second sun. But to cut to the chase, I'm reasonably sure, well, I haven't been able to shoot since the 23rd, but as of the 23rd, I am reasonably sure the second sun was behind our sun. It's going to be a big deal when this becomes common knowledge.
Could there be a bigger deal than this? You know, they've been talking about the idea of multiple suns throughout antiquity. We hear of the black sun. Apparently,
that's something. There's 3 suns, just to be clear. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
The Bible has hidden all kinds of information. There's the surface narrative, which is the lowest level of information. And it's designed that way. And they hope that you never get beyond the story, just the surface story. They hope that most people never. That's why when you go to church, that's all you're ever taught is the same stories over and over and over. It has been claimed that in any significantly old religion in this world, there's at least 7 levels of meaning under that. Everyone's aware of the allegory that's done with the sun, even to the point of the sun S-O-N and the sun S-U-N. But this gets into a fight where people who are raised Christian take umbrage and people who are raised science. You see what happens there, but that's not really what you should focus on. It's actually there, but it's talking about other things, like how the human body can reach enlightenment, which is what the church never wanted anyone to reach. To get back to the point, the black sun, to the best of my knowledge right now, if I had to guess, is below us. And there's probably an aperture at the North Pole. Can I prove any of this? No, I cannot. So what you're hearing me here is what I suspect is true. In other words, it's worth exactly nothing. Further, the Masonic logo with the compass and the square, I suspect that the compass is measuring the angle of light down to Earth from our sun, and that the square underneath is measuring the angle from what's called the black sun. But anything to do with the black sun, I can't prove or demonstrate anything. So I'm just going to set all that aside because I can say a few things from firsthand observation about the other two suns.
Okay, so let's talk about from the other two suns, the one that's apparently occluded. What is your conception of that? How do you? Okay, so here's the thing. Here's what we know, Crow. The idea of a second sun completely flies against any conception of a solar system, gravity.
Right.
It throws that out the window. So we would immediately understand why NASA would want to completely hide this, because it basically debunks all of them and it completely invalidates every single thing they tell us. But how do you conceive this, the second sun? So as opposed to the black sun and the sun that we see apparently in the sky, what is this other so-called sun? How do you conceive of it in your mind?
I'm currently in line with Eric Dollard, who studied the sun for 4 years, and I'm very close in line. But not only everything you said, it goes against what our brains have been programmed to accept. I mean, look in the comments section right now. You'll see people say, you know, it's not even possible. Well, based on what? If you tell me it's not possible, then what's that based on? Usually what it's based on is because they've chosen to believe a thing, not because they've done any observation or research of any kind. To get back to it, Dollard says our sun is a transformer, and I accept that. I didn't have the words for it, but I was thinking along that line. I was thinking as if something else is bringing power into our sun. You see it on the Masonic woodcuts. There's like a hole through the clouds with energy coming down to our sun, and then that energy is shown bouncing off mirrors or the moon and stuff and coming down to Earth. But he further says that it is not nuclear, which I'm all about that. It's magnetic and electric. I think there may be some fission activity in the flame-like prominences, but I also think it's hollow, and I think the sunspots demonstrate that. Dollard says something very similar. He says that other sun is in counter space, or probably connected to counter space, but that's where he leaves it. So what I can tell you for sure right now is that it exists. I can prove that it exists. It's even had a polarized light filter put on it, and a polarized light filter will remove a reflection. So we know darn well it's not a reflection.
I wanted to bring this up, Crow. The ancients talked about the idea of the second sun as a harbinger of destruction. A lot of people have an idea of the Sumerians, the so-called Anunnaki, and the Anuna. Now we know that, you know, modern culture has their own story of these Anunnaki, and they've almost become lampooned in current media. But that doesn't take away the idea that this was recognized by the most very ancient cultures that we have access to, at least if we're to take the story of history. And they talked about the idea of a dark star. They talked about the idea of a twin sun, nemesis, wormwood in the Bible. Do you see this second sun along those lines as a harbinger of something? Go ahead.
No, I see it as in step with the era change. What I think is probably going on is that part of the reason they're chemtrailing all the time is to block the spiritual upgrade that the energies coming down would be. Now there's two bodies up there. If I was going to assign like everything alchemically, or even take it from the Bible, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, well, alchemy has that same version for just everyday things, the body, the soul, and the spirit. If I had to guess, that other one is the spirit. In the alchemical makeup of everything in our world, whether it's a leaf on a tree or a rock. I'm sure you're familiar. But to me, it's beckoning us to upgrade our consciousness. And to me, every effort is being made to block it, to lie about it. And as you pointed out, you know, people are aware of things like the three-body problem. But if it was openly admitted that there's another thing there, gravity goes away, their little orbital models of everything go away, all of it falls apart.
Wow, this is mind-blowing. It really is.
It is. And it's hard to, this is why I don't read any, you know, this is why I don't learn what to properly call the little striations around a sunspot. I don't want any of that knowledge, because when I got into astronomy in the 90s, NASA was the be all and end all. The whole thing for me was, I'm going to get a camera on this new 8-inch telescope, and I'm going to make those beautiful images like the Hubble's making. And then as time went on, I realized, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And that's where it all started. And before I was done, I had to unlearn, or try to unlearn. It's not very easy to unlearn anything. It's not, you can't really forget just because you want to. But I learned as I went along not to pollute my mind with the social engineering. And unfortunately, some of it's not social engineering, but how do you tell the difference? So I just go my own way and do the best I can. And hopefully other people will appreciate it and they can take it further. That's my hope, that other people will say, hey, that's interesting. I'd like to do something and see what I can learn. It looks like Rose put up the original capture of the second sun. Here it is with a very low-end hydrogen alpha system. You can see where the prominences, the little bumps on the side, but they're not even resolved. I've taken a light leap forward with what I can bring to bear, but you're going to see the other sun come into view for all the doubters.
Yeah, come on, walk us through this. So please just
look at the top of the frame, and you're going to see a little thing scoot by the top. That's the sun we see with our eyes every day. Now watch the top of the frame. That other one, which looks a little out of focus, is in fact the second sun, discovered at either the end of 2014 or 2013 or early 2014. I forget. I lost the timestamps on my clips. But this is it. And then 2 years later, Chris Van Matre replicated it. Then Cami Nodell took polarized filters and proved it's not a reflection. Then, get this, you can look this up online now. The SLU Observatory was live streaming the transit of Mercury across the sun, but they had a problem. The second sun was so close to our sun, they couldn't get it out of frame. So about halfway through the clip, he says, I bet you're all wondering what that other object is. Then he says, that is our second sun. You didn't know it was there, did you? Well, we have a second sun. And he said, by the way, NASA knows all about it, but they don't want you to know about it, or they don't want us to talk about it. So there's the facts. If I had to ask you, what is the most important movie ever made that socially engineered our minds with regard to the moon, what movie would that be?
Oh God, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
There you go. It's got to be, right? Won Academy Awards. It was a big, big deal because it was designed to get us to accept it was possible to go to the moon, show us what it was going to look like. Did you know there's a sequel to that movie?
I actually watched it, Crow. The last time I talked to you, you mentioned it. And they basically go to one of the moons of Saturn, I believe. And it's completely wild. It's more wild than the original.
It's a better movie in my view. The first one is technically awesome, but the storyline is boring as all get out. It's way too long. But the second one's called 2010. And we'll set aside that 2001 named itself because of 9/11 coming on the way. There's even the Black Obelisk was built into a hotel called the Millennium at Ground Zero. I kid you not. But in the movie 2010, which is the sequel to the most important space psychological engineering movie ever made, at the end of it, the star of the show has a speech where he says, in this new age, my children will grow up in a sun with two skies. Go look
That's
at
right.
it.
That's right. A sky with two suns, because the moon or Saturn basically becomes the second sun. Isn't that correct?
It's Jupiter. It's supposed to be Saturn in the books, but they didn't want to be so obvious, so they made it Jupiter. But the point is that they're flat out telling you that there's going to be two suns. I think
this is wild.
Yeah, I think the MasterCard logo might actually be echoing that. And by the way, that scene out of Star Wars where Luke is on whatever that famous planet is, it looks just like that when you see it in the way I did when Luke's on Tatooine or wherever it is, and they show that it looks just like that. It's a little bit smaller and a little out of focus and a little bit weird red because you're looking at it in hydrogen alpha. But I've got a system set up and I've got big plans. I just need to be able to spot it when it's not behind our sun.
Wow, this is
And I've been
wild.
searching for years. You have no idea how much effort I've put.
I
looking
believe,
for this.
Crow, I've been looking for the second sun since 2010. I remember staring out into the sky during sunset. This is when I first started hearing this idea of a second sun, and people started talking about it. And then I kind of got gaslit, to thinking maybe I'm a little cuckoo. But I've always kept it in the back of my mind all this time. And now I guess I've come to a point where I'm at a place where I'm not looking at it with such dread, because it was a fearful thing for me based on the way it was being presented. It was being presented as, some type of harbinger of destruction. But again, that's only propaganda and that's only indoctrination. If we could look at this more of, like you said, a transition with the ages, and if we can get out of this idea of solar system and gravity wells and things like that, and think of it more as an energetic construct, then maybe we can look at this thing as something that could be welcomed, and something that's maybe even something positive. And maybe that's why they're occluding it from us, because maybe it's ushering in a new age of positivity and something that we can look forward to. Yeah, I like that. I'm gonna
consciousness. Haven't you noticed that even dogs? I've seen bulldogs grab a skateboard and ride it in a pool like you're supposed to. If a dog did that in the 1970s, it would have been the most famous dog in the world. Everything's consciousness is rising. Everything. And every effort is being made to give you water that stunts your brain, food that stunts your brain, inoculations that stunt your brain, anything, chemtrails blocking sunlight, on and on it goes. But when you quit being afraid and you start tuning in, there is a massive spiritual benefit to the sun. For anyone who's ever sun gazed, they recognize the truth in that statement. And by the way, don't go out and stare at the sun if you don't know what you're doing. You'll go blind. You'll damage your eyes. But for those who have learned how to do it, my vision was repaired. I had astigmatism. It feels like you're a battery coming off a charger. There is a spiritual component to the light, which should be no surprise because the Bible is full of references to the light. It's a big deal, and we are in a very exciting time. It's just unfortunate that some dark hearts want to own the whole enchilada and slave us all out.